President Cyril Ramaphosa has told members of parliament that he will not respond to attacks made against him during the SONA debate earlier today. He responded to various remarks made by MPs during the two-day debate. Ramaphosa says insults won't help solve the challenges South Africa is dealing with.
There is no need to respond to the insults that were lodged here, because in the end the insults that were hurled here do not contribute to a meaningful debate about the challenges our country faces. Instead, I am motivated to reflect on the constructive criticisms and sincere suggestions that have been put forward with a view to improving the state of our nation. I refer here, for example, to the contribution on behalf of the Honorable Buthelezi on the characterization and appropriate response to state capture. I refer to the suggestions by the Honorable Whitfield on moving the South African Police Service into the 21st century by introducing modern, cutting-edge training for police officers and the more effective use of technology. I refer to the call by Honorable Malema on the industrialization of cannabis in a manner that benefits local farmers in places like the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and KwaZulu-Natal.
President Cyril Ramaphosa today, responding, of course, to the debate that is going on. He insists again today that the developmental state is a state that drives economic and social transformation, while the private sector that is expanding will fuel the growth as well as the employment that is needed in the country. Of course, that is a debate that the EFF has weighed in on, and other partners as well. We're joined now by the Chief Whip of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Floyd Shivambu, to be a part of the conversation tonight. You are, of course, getting in touch with us on that WhatsApp number, 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Floyd, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. And I'm sure I don't have to remind you, because you were listening, the President is still insisting on that statement. A developmental state is one that drives economic and social transformation, while expanding private sector participation is what is going to fuel growth and employment. Does recognizing the role of business in creating employment represent a cop-out by the state as far as the role that it needs to play in coordinating, planning, guiding, and the development rather of this economy?
I think your characterization of that the president is insisting on what he said on Thursday last week is incorrect, because when he gave the State of Nation address on Thursday last week, he said that we all know that the government does not create jobs. Jobs are created by business. And that was a conclusive statement that he made. And then when we came to illustrate through very cogent inputs by the Commander-in-Chief, by the Treasurer General of the EFF, by the National Organizer, by all our inputs there, we argued firmly that his characterization of the relationship between the state and the economy, particularly in relation to job creation, is incorrect. It then today came to admit that what he basically said on Thursday was incorrect, and then stated clearly today that the state has a clear role to play in job creation through state-owned enterprises, public employment programs, industrial policy, competition policy, infrastructure investments, and a variety of other interventions. That was a retraction of what he had said on Thursday. And the context of what he was saying on Thursday, he was basically characterizing the South African state as a neo-colonial, neoliberal state that is not involved in the management of the economy. But now he has got to realize that philosophically and ideologically, it does not make sense to want to distance the state from the development of the productive forces, which is called economic growth if you use the most common language in terms of what happens. But you can never have any development of the productive forces without the direct role of the state, and the state must be leading in that particular development, including leading how the private sector must invest, where the content, the form, direction, and the pace. That is why in all our inputs, we utilize the example of China, that whilst private capital is allowed to exist in China, the Chinese state is not a neoliberal capitalist state which is controlled by a group of few capitalists. The Chinese economy is controlled by a central communist party of China that gives direction in terms of where investments must happen, and that is often in line with the five-year plans which are approved in conferences of the Communist Party of China. And that is the central planning that defines development in China. And we have illustrated so many benefits that have got to accrue to China because of these interventions. These include the fact that more than 800 million people were taken out of poverty. China came from being number 100 in the economy. It's the biggest economy currently. It will be the biggest within the next 10 years. It will be the most dominant economy in the entire world. It has got more than 133 corporations in the global top 500 companies, and majority of those are owned by the Chinese government, the People's Republic of China. It is playing a significant role in the development of infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative in the African continent, in Europe, in Eurasia as well, in terms of what gets to happen. So that is the issue that we're dealing with there, that we strongly illustrated and that what the president had said on Thursday was pure nonsense, and he got to admit that he cannot sustain an ideological confusion. That the state does not create jobs, it's only business that does so. Yeah. So there is now an appreciation that all these aspects, all these sectors of society should play a role in the development of the productive forces and creation of jobs.
Are you saying to us then, therefore, all along there's been that appreciation within the economic freedom fighters as well, that private sector creates, as they couched it today, most jobs? You're not arguing that fact.
No, look, what happens is that these different forms of states under capitalism or under socialist transitions, you have got governments or states that are not involved in the economy. They somehow believe that there will be an invisible hand of the market. The market will regulate itself. It will decide where to invest, which opportunities. All what that state does is to just allow the conditions favorable for capitalists to make as much profit as possible. But then you have, on the other hand, developmental states and socialist states like China, like it's the case in Vietnam, that purposefully say that these are the industries that we're going to invest in. These are the areas where we must develop the productive forces. These are the technologies that we must borrow and later on develop. These are the areas where we must innovate. These are the areas where we must sometimes relax labor law so that we can attract more investments. So there's a difference between a capitalist free market state that is not involved in the management of the economy with the hope that there will be an invisible hand of the market that is going to develop the productive forces, and a developmental or socialist state that directs the content, the form, the nature, the pace, the direction of investments that happen in a country. So what has been happening in South Africa was that we had been imposed a neoliberal free market economic system through first the adoption of the Growth, Employment and Redistribution Strategy in 1996 that says that all you need to do is to just supply broad public goods and bulk services, and then you allow the market to be the one that grows your economy and create jobs. And we know what has been the consequences of GEAR. And despite the failures of GEAR, despite the failures of ASGISA and all the economic policies that were based on free market fundamentalism, we still continue to believe that the state must not play a much more significant role in terms of directing the nature, form, content, direction, and pace of the development of the productive forces. So there's a distinction between the state which was conceptualized to be a state for development or a state that is just going to let the market run itself without direction. In China, all the major corporations, including Alibaba, which is one of the biggest corporations, private corporations in the world, are under the constant guidance of the People's Republic of China's government. Just in the recent past, Alibaba wanted to list an IPO, one of the biggest listings in the Shanghai Stock Exchange, but the Communist Party of China says that you cannot have a corporation that is, which is potentially going to be bigger than the entire economic revenue of the state. And they stopped it. This constant guidance of where capital goes in terms of what happens. But in South Africa, there is no capacity. The state is not above capital. Instead, capitalists are the one who dictate what should be done, what policies must be adopted, what agenda must be pursued. So that is the distinction that has to be drawn in terms of what happens. And that is why we've been trapped in underdevelopment, because we've been waiting for these capitalists to develop the productive forces, and they've not been doing so for a variety of reasons, which include races.
All right. Now, the president, quoting one article from Professor Marwara, on 87% of employment, urban employment in China in 2018 coming from the private sector, and saying to this, we need to then therefore mobilize. Still with the State of the Nation address, the president responding today, he says there's been a rather important debate that has emerged, of course, from the statements that he said on Thursday around who will be playing a role in creating jobs for close to, or maybe over 11 million South Africans who are currently unemployed. EFF Deputy President Chief Whip in Parliament, Floyd Shivambu, saying, well, this is a president conceding that ideologically what he said last week, Thursday, was incorrect. And in fact, he has somewhat corrected his statement. So, Floyd, he says, to expand our productive capacity, we need to unleash the potential of the private sector, one, but two, to mobilize private capital and to promote private enterprise. And then he quotes that 87% of urban employment in China was from a private sector in 2018, pointing to the fact that this is where a bulk or most jobs are going to have to come from.
Look, I've not read the article by the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. But the category which they're saying is private employment in China includes the self-employment initiatives, which are a dominant sector of employment, entrepreneurship of people who are trading goods and services. And in majority of cases, those of people who have been to China cities of Guangzhou, of Shenzhen, and Beijing, of Shenzhen, and a variety of other spaces, will realize that the state provides the bulk services, even like the create, there's no conglomerate or these huge retail chain stores that are selling everything in the entirety of China. They break that down so that as many people as possible are able to engage in small scale trading. So that number of 87%, when it includes the people who are directly aided by the local state and also are aided by the national government, it's more or less like it's not the number that is cited there in terms of what happens. But that doesn't take away the fact that if he was doing an overall analysis of the role of the state in the economy of China, we should have also mentioned that 30% of the revenue that is paid to China's State Taxation Administration is paid by the state-owned companies in China, like the state-owned corporations. So if the Chinese economy collects a revenue of 100 billion or 100 trillion US dollars, it means like 30% of that comes from the state sector. And this is against the backdrop that you have got more than 1.5 billion people who are also paying personal income tax and private corporations which are paying the income taxes. So you can see the significance of the state sector of the economy in China in terms of its contribution to the revenue, which is responsible for the massive infrastructure rollout which has got to happen in the railway project, in building of power stations, in building of highways, not only in China, but in many parts of the African continent. Part of what we're illustrating in the SONA debate was that a lot of infrastructure programs that are taking place in the African continent are financed by Chinese state-owned corporations in a way that is dually beneficial for all of us in terms of what happens. So the professor has taken a reductionist approach if he only said that 87% is from private employment without giving the breakdown of that. It's not as simplistic as he had presented it.
So what do we lack, or where are we sitting, right, as a developmental state on these three areas? Hope you can remember them in terms of strategy, strategic direction. So in other words, a defined common agenda that comes from government as far as where we need to go. But two, in terms of organization, in terms of structures and systems that we are putting in place in all spheres of government. And number three, in terms of technical capacity. So the ability to translate those broad projects like the infrastructure project that you talk about into efficient programs that are in place.
No, you know what is important is what we've been saying must be done in Parliament. One of the things that has to be done, by the way, is this issue of state having custodianship of all land. So if those who have got time, or if yourself you have got time as well, after this interview, you must go and check the Constitution of the People's Republic of China. In Article 10, it says that land in the cities is owned by the state, land in the rural and suburban areas is owned by collective, except in those proportions of the state that they are given to other sectors of the economy. But the state in China is in ownership of all the land. It's in ownership of all the strategic sectors of the economy. It uses its regulatory power to guide business investments. It owns the bigger majority of the financial services sector, such that they are able to finance as many developmental initiatives and entrepreneurial projects as possible.
Yeah.
But the South African state does not have any capacity. One, it does not have the land. Two, it does not have any financial institution to could drive investment or even finance investments. Like the capacity of the South African state to drive a decisive developmental project is not there. Hence, we have to take the land. We have to create a state-owned bank. We need to drive a clear industrialization program and policy, which in some instances might involve the substitution of unnecessary imports, because in a current setup, we import virtually everything into the African economy. But also we need to form the developmental partnerships that are taking place in many parts of the African continent. It's possible currently to could construct massive railway projects, bullet trains, without the dream of the ANC president. Like, there is possibility in the global sphere now to mobilize a proper infrastructure development program that can develop our economy. Like, if you can go and check, that's just how many projects, massive mega projects that are taking place in Tanzania, for instance. Huge port in Bagamoyo, a new city in Dodoya, a standard gauge rail project from Morogoro to Dar es Salaam, and a variety of other things. And Tanzania does not have the economic muscles and the fiscal stability and strength that South Africa has. It doesn't have the reserves that South Africa has. But we are not being led properly to could develop infrastructure, to could take the land. We are not being led to could create financial institutions that are going to drive meaningful industrial expansion. There is no proper content to the industrial policies that we use, because what we are doing with industrial policy, we are just attracting companies from other parts of the world to come and assemble what otherwise are finished goods and products from elsewhere. Whilst we are supposed to be involved in innovation and substitution that is going to absorb as many people as possible into quality, proper paying employment that is needed. So currently we are directionless, and because we are leaderless, the ANC has got both ideological confusion and paucity in terms of what happens. Philosophically, they do not know what must happen. That is why when they are presented with facts every time, they always shift this way and this way without standing firm on any of the principles.
So if we were to look at the developmental state and its use of a variety of instruments and policies, right, you are saying Therefore, for example, one of the policies that we need to be putting in place, or instruments we can use, is the redistribution of incomes and assets. And in that particular instance, you're talking about land, that we are not effectively using that instrument. And you're saying if we don't begin to use that instrument, all the others, the like regulation of industry, competition commission, whatever, the use of fiscal monetary policy, the Reserve Bank and so on, all those are going to be meaningless. They're not going to help us in any way unless we begin to use this one instrument effectively.
Yeah, look, there are several instruments which the state can utilize to develop South Africa's economy. For instance, we are home to a variety of industrial and precious minerals and metals in South Africa: gold, diamonds, platinum group metals and minerals, a variety of other things, chrome. There's a lot of minerals, but we do not have clear legislation on beneficiation. There is just a sentence in the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act that says that a minister can determine what quantities of minerals can be exported and what quantities must be locally beneficiated. But that instrument is not being utilized, because if we were to come much more firmly to say that we cannot export 100% of South Africa's minerals, at least the minimum of 50% must be locally beneficiated and added value on. That is going to increase the economy. It's going to absorb as many people as possible into quality, proper jobs. It is going to also align our skills into beneficiation of the minerals that we need to do domestically. But we're not doing that. There is virtually nothing that we domestically beneficiate out of the more than 54 precious industrial metals and minerals that are coming from beneath our soil. So that is one of the legislative and regulatory instruments that can be utilized by the state in terms of what happens. And one of the other important instruments to use to drive growth and development is the tariff controls that South Africa just allows all goods and products, finished goods and products, to come into our country without any limitations. We're the most free market world the free market economy in the entire world, like more free market than the United States, more free market than the UK, which are homes of capitalism. And there is no need to pursue that route, because if, for instance, we could say that at least 50% of furniture or plastic products must be made here in South Africa, just how many jobs we're going to create? There is not a single corporation in South Africa currently that manufactures electronics like television sets and cell phones and a variety of other electronics, laptops, computers, and all of those things. And just how many of those do we have in South Africa? Even for household appliances like the fridges and the microwaves and washing machines, just how many do we have of those in South Africa? Now there's digital migration, where we're going to have television sets that are fitted in with what was going to be an outside set-top box. Just how many of those are we going to domestically manufacture? So we need certainty and decisiveness in terms of the regulatory power, and saying that we need to locally beneficiate and locally produce our own goods and services. Yeah. And there's no one who is going to say that in return, the West is going to close the market and everything else, because what we are basically taking to the West is the mineral resources, which they do not have. It's not like they've got an option to go and get platinum from elsewhere. They do not have an option to go and get chrome or a variety of other minerals elsewhere. They need us, but we behave as if we need them in terms of this global balance of forces in the uneven combined development that defines all of us now. So that is one of the things that have to be done much more differently, and has been a total failure of the post-1994 government. Has been unable to utilize its regulatory, legislative instruments and power to drive meaningful economic and expansion and development that create jobs. That is why we've got more than 11 million people in South Africa who are capable of working but are jobless.
Let's continue in a moment with Deputy President of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Floyd Shivambu, and talk a little bit as we wrap up the conversation about developing a strong public service. But not only that, what do we make of all these programs that the President is talking about in terms of 40% procurement to women businesses, employment equity amendment bill, presidency driving the program of action, and so on and so forth. Well, I'll wrap up now the conversation with Economic Freedom Fighters Chief Whip in Parliament, Floyd Shivambu, on the state of the nation response and debate that has been going on now for the week. So, Floyd, are you saying, I mean, some of the programs that are being announced here are a complete, for lack of a better word, waste of time, or they're trying to hoodwink us into thinking something is happening when actually nothing is happening? So they announced 40%, for example, of government procurement for women-owned businesses. It's not a new thing, but the president reiterating that we are now serious about this, talking about the employment equity amendment bill that will ensure that we look closely into who's being employed, particularly into meaningful position. But also this idea of a strong public service being concentrated more or less in the presidency, saying the president, now we are showing a focused drive towards economic growth, and the president is driving this program of action with all the other capable departments and ministries. Is that meaningful intervention at all?
No, look, I think it's a problematic approach in terms of how these issues are handled. Like, so in procurement, for instance, what is essential about procurement legislation, both the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act, they have to be amended to include one localization, that the state should look to buy local, and then it must be legislated that in the final analysis, the number of procurement activities and programs and tenders that are given by the state should have been given to women and should have been given to youth. That must be clearly stated in a legislation, because what happens is that if it's just a policy perspective which is not legislated, the government officials are not compelled to comply with it. Like, it's like these preferential procurement policies that are there. They're not compulsory, but overrides everything else. There is the PFMA and MFMA, because that is what the Auditor General audits these municipal and accounting officers and government accounting officers on the basis of. So if we amend the PFMA and MFMA in terms of what should be the content of procurement, to clearly state that there must be locally produced products that are procured for government usage, whether it's food, whether it's a textile for hospitals, whether it's electronics, whether for all government departments, whether it's cars, all of those things. If it's clearly stated, it will later on become even an audit negative finding if people went to purchase things that are not made locally. But also it will be an audit finding if people have not significantly empowered women in a manner that it is. So to just speak about it, no, women are going to be given procurement without legislating, it will never have an impact. You can go to so many speeches of all ANC presidents in the SONA. That commitment has always been made. They're just making it a rhetorical commitment. They're not ready to implement it into something meaningful. And remember that as part of our private members' bills, we had submitted that we need to amend the PFMA so that we can have a PFMA that drives, that ignites real economic development domestically in a manner that it is. And the ANC flatly refused. And this is despite the fact that in their own elections manifesto, they say that the state must procure 80% of goods and services that are locally made. But when it would come to Parliament and say, let us make that into law, they refuse to make that. So majority of these things which they're talking about are not about transforming the economy fundamentally. So like employment equity, of course, must happen. We must have as many, like the demographics of South Africa must be reflected in boardrooms, in all these corporations and everything else. But what is ultimately essential is to develop the productive forces, is to make the cake bigger. And we are saying we can do that by utilizing the state power to locally procure, by utilizing the regulatory and legislative capacity of the state to say that minerals must be domestically beneficiated, by building meaningful infrastructure, a real network that must connect all the major towns and cities of South Africa, but also later on interconnect to the standard gauge rail projects that are happening in Tanzania, in Zambia, in Burundi, in Rwanda, and many other parts of the African continent, so that we're able to realize fully one of the flagship programs of Agenda 2063 of the African Union. So it's one of the things that must be done in a much more coordinated and clear, purposeful way. But the current government is just scratching the surface. There's no intention to meaningfully develop South Africa's economy.
Floyd Shivambu, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us, Deputy President of the Economic Freedom Fighters there in that conversation, responding to today's debate that has been going on really for the past week on the state of the nation. We stay